I never meant to buy it. The photograph wasn't even for sale, not really. It was tucked between the pages of a used book I picked up at a thrift store on the corner of Main and Willow, the kind of place that smelled like dust and old carpet. I had been killing time, running my fingers across cracked spines, when I found a collection of short stories with half its cover torn away. I flipped through, and something slipped out, fluttering to the floor. A photograph, black and white, old, maybe from the 50s or 60s. It showed a family, mother, father, two children, standing stiffly in front of a house. Their expressions were strangely neutral, not smiling, not sad, just caught in that flat, awkward look of old portraits. I picked it up, brushed it off, and slipped it back into the book. At the register, the cashier didn't notice it. I didn't mention it either. That night, back at my apartment, I pulled the photo out again. Something about it unsettled me, though I couldn't put my finger on why. Maybe it was the way the children's eyes seemed to follow me, or the fact that the house behind them looked eerily similar to one on the edge of my town. I propped it on my desk, told myself it was nothing, and went about my night. But later, when I glanced back at it, I froze. The boy in the photo wasn't looking at the camera anymore. He was looking at me. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, convinced I was tired. I leaned closer. His gaze was direct now, piercing, his head tilted slightly as though he'd shifted in the instant I'd looked away. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. Old photo. Shadows. My mind playing tricks. I left it there and went to bed. The next morning, when I checked again, the boy's eyes were back to normal, facing forward, blank, expressionless. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. But the unease lingered. That night, I looked again. This time, it wasn't just the boy. The father's hand had moved. In the original photo, I was sure it rested stiffly at his side. Now it was curled around the mother's shoulder, fingers digging slightly into the fabric of her dress. His face was still blank, but the grip seemed too tight, too deliberate, almost possessive. I stared at it for nearly an hour, convinced the details would snap back if I looked away. But they didn't. When I finally dragged myself to bed, I couldn't sleep. My dreams were restless, filled with the sound of clicking shutters and the sensation of unseen eyes. By the third night, the changes were undeniable. The daughter, who had stood clutching a doll in the first version, no longer held it. Her hands were empty, hanging at her sides. And behind her, in the window of the house, a shadow had appeared. A figure, indistinct, watching. I felt cold all over. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture, and compared it to the image I'd taken the first night. The differences were real. The doll was gone. The shadow wasn't there before. Something was happening to the photograph. I told myself to throw it away, burn it, tear it up, but I didn't. Instead, I placed it carefully back on my desk and sat in front of it, watching, waiting. I told myself it was curiosity. I wanted to see what would happen. But beneath that, I felt something else, a pull, subtle but relentless. The photograph wanted me to keep looking, and I did. Every night, without fail. The changes grew bolder. The mother's face turned slightly, her expression sharpening into something almost fearful. The boy moved closer to the front, his gaze locked on me with unsettling intensity. The shadow in the window grew clearer, like it was stepping forward, pressing against the glass. One night, I swear I saw its hand, pressed flat against the inside of the window. The photograph had become a ritual. I'd rush home from work, barely bothering with dinner, just to check it. Each time, my heart raced. My skin prickled with dread and anticipation. I told no one. How could I? What would I say? That an old picture was alive? That it was changing before my eyes? They'd laugh. Or worse, they'd look at me with pity, the way people look at someone slipping out of reality. So it became my secret, my burden. And with each night, the photograph grew darker. The family no longer looked stiff or neutral. They looked wrong. Their bodies seemed tense, strained, as though caught in some moment of conflict. The mother's mouth tightened into a grim line. The boy leaned forward, closer, closer, his eyes burning with intensity. The girl's head began to tilt unnaturally, her expression blank, her hands at odd angles. And a shadow in the window. It was no longer just a shadow. It was a man, pale, expressionless, standing inside the house, watching through the glass. The same house I'd driven past 100 times at the edge of town. The night I saw the figure in the window was the night I stopped pretending it was all in my head. Up until then, I could still lie to myself, chalk it up to fatigue, to the tricks of old photography, to an overactive imagination. But the moment I recognized the pale, human shape behind the glass, I knew the photograph wasn't just old, it was alive. And worse, it was aware of me. That night, I hardly slept. Every creak of the apartment made me sit up straight, heart racing, certain that when I turned my head, the figure would no longer be confined to the photograph. But morning came, and the photo was unchanged from the night before. Or so I thought, because when I leaned closer, I noticed the girl's doll was back. Only it wasn't in her hands anymore. It was in the shadow figure's. He clutched it tightly, pressed against the glass of the window, his pale fingers curled around its tiny cloth body. I stumbled back, ball rising in my throat. This wasn't just random shifting. It was deliberate, intentional. The figure took things, and was getting bolder. That entire day, I felt sick with dread. I tried to go about my normal routine, answer emails, run errands, cook something simple, but nothing felt real anymore. The only thing that mattered was the photograph waiting for me back home. By the time the sun went down, my hands were trembling. I told myself not to look. I told myself to take the photo, shove it in a drawer, forget it. But when I finally sat down in front of it again, the changes nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. The family was no longer together. The mother had turned completely toward the father, her mouth twisted open in what looked like a silent scream. His hand was still gripping her shoulder, but now it dug in harder, the fingers visibly pressing into her skin. The boy was halfway out of the frame, leaning forward so close that his face nearly pressed against the glass. His eyes were sharp now, unnervingly human, staring right at me. The girl was gone, her spot empty. The shadow in the window had stepped forward. Its face was pressed against the glass, features clearer now. Hollow eyes, a thin mouth stretched into something too straight to be a smile. In its hands, it clutched both the doll and something else. The girl's ribbon. I slammed the photograph down on the desk, heart hammering, my breath ragged. This was wrong. This was impossible. I grabbed my phone, searched frantically for answers, stories of haunted objects, cursed photographs, anything. I found urban legends, creepy tales on message boards, speculation about mirrors and paintings that moved, but nothing that matched this. Nothing that explained a photograph that changed every night, a photograph that seemed to consume. By 2 a.m, my eyes burned, and I still hadn't found anything useful. I turned back toward the photo. The boy had moved closer again. Now his forehead pressed against the inside of the glass. His breath, if it was breath, fogged the surface faintly. And for the first time, I swore I saw the photo shimmer. Like the boundary between their world and mine was thinner than it should be. I tore it off the desk, shoved it into the drawer, and slammed it shut. But even then, lying in bed, I felt its presence. Heavy, patient, like it was waiting for me to look again. The next day, I tried something different. I didn't open the drawer, didn't even glance at it. I went to work, buried myself in distractions, tried to drown out the gnawing curiosity that clawed at my brain. By the time I came home, I felt almost proud of myself. I'd ignored it. I'd won. But when I walked in my bedroom, the photograph was sitting on my desk, not in the drawer, propped up against the lamp, waiting. I froze, my skin crawling, cold sweat breaking across my forehead. I hadn't touched it. No one else had a key. And yet there it was. I told myself to burn it, to end it right there. But my body wouldn't move. My eyes were already locked on it, desperate, terrified. The changes were worse than ever. The mother's face was twisted into a mask of terror now, her mouth stretched wide in a scream I could almost hear. The father's expression had shifted too, his blank stare turning downward, almost ashamed, his grip on her shoulder trembling. The boy's face pressed harder against the glass, his features warped by the pressure, his eyes wild, filled with something like rage or hunger. And the shadow figure. It was no longer behind the glass. It was halfway out the front door of the house. Closer, closer every night. That night, I dreamed of footsteps in the hall, slow and deliberate. I dreamed of a doll's glassy eyes staring from the corner of my room. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And when I turned toward the desk, the photograph was waiting, faintly glowing in the moonlight. The boy's lips were parted now, as though whispering something I couldn't hear. The night I saw the boy's lips part was the night I started listening. At first, it was only silence, but the silence itself felt alive, vibrating, like the faint hum of power lines on a damp evening. Then, as I sat in the dark with my ear tilted closer to the photograph, I heard it. A whisper. So faint, so fragile, I thought it might just be my imagination. But when I leaned closer, the sound sharpened. Not words. Not exactly. More like the rhythm of speech, something on the edge of language, slipping away the moment I thought I grasped it. I jerked back, my chair toppling with a crash. The whisper cut off instantly. The boy's face remained pressed to the glass, but now, his lips curved upward ever so slightly. Like he knew I'd heard him. That night, I turned the photograph face down on the desk and stumbled into bed. But even then, I swore I could hear it from across the room, tiny, muffled breaths pressing against the wood. By morning, the photo had shifted again. This time, the changes were not limited to the family. The background had changed too. The yard looked different, untidy, weeds creeping higher, the grass overgrown. The once bright sky in the photo was clouded now, shadows thick and heavy, a storm brewing. And in the corner, where there had been nothing before, I saw something small. A car that hadn't been in the picture before. I squinted at it, my stomach dropping. It wasn't just any car. It was mine, parked at the edge of the house, clear as day. I stumbled back, breathing fast. The photo wasn't just moving, it was expanding, including me. I grabbed my phone, desperate to document it. I snapped a photo, then pulled up the image I'd taken just nights earlier. Side by side, the differences screamed at me. The doll, gone. The girl, missing. The shadow, moving closer. The car, my car. The photo was watching my world now. And then, something worse happened. That evening on my drive home, I passed a street near the edge of town, the one with the house from the photograph. Only this time, something was different. A black sedan sat parked in front, its hood dented, its headlights smashed. Police tape fluttered in the breeze. 2 officers stood near the driveway, speaking in low tones. I slowed as I passed, heart hammering, and that's when I saw the family. Or at least, what was left of them. The father stood near the porch, his face blank, staring into nothing. A woman, his wife, I assumed, sat on the steps, her hands covering her face. Beside her, a boy clutched a tattered doll, though he was far too old to play with it. And at the window, behind the glass, a pale, expressionless figure stared out, just like in a photograph. I drove faster, my palms slick against the steering wheel, terror burning through me. The photo wasn't just changing. It was showing me things. Real things. That night, I sat in front of it again, unable to resist. My fear mixed with a horrible curiosity, the need to see what else it would reveal. The car in the photo was clearer now, parked even closer to the house. The father's grip on the mother had loosened, but her face was wet, streaked with what looked like tears. The boy was no longer pressed against the glass. He stood outside now, halfway between the porch and the yard, his gaze fixed outward. And in the far right corner of the frame, another figure had appeared. A man I recognized. My neighbor. The next morning, I saw him on my way to work. He was loading groceries into his trunk, humming to himself. Perfectly normal. Perfectly alive. But in the photograph, he looked different. His clothes were torn. His face pale. And behind him, the shadow figure loomed, its hands raised like claws. I swallowed hard, gripping the photo so tightly my knuckles whitened. Was this the past? The future? A warning? Or a threat? That night, I stayed awake, checking my window every hour, convinced I'd see the shadow standing in the yard. But the street remained empty, still almost too quiet. By morning, I forced myself to step outside, blinking in the sharp daylight. My neighbor's car was still parked in its spot. He wasn't outside. Everything seemed normal, until I saw the paper. A headline on the front page. Local man found dead in his home. It was him, my neighbor. I dropped the paper while rising in my throat. The photo hadn't been showing possibilities. It had been showing inevitabilities. By the time I returned to my apartment, my hands were trembling. I forced myself to look again. The photo had changed once more. The family was nearly gone now. The mother's body was faint, fading from the image. The father slumped on the porch, his head in his hands. The boy stood alone in the yard, staring outward. And in the center of the photo, unmistakable and horrifying, was me. My back turned, my figure small, walking toward the house. I stopped, leaving the photograph in my bedroom. It didn't matter. No matter where I placed it, in a drawer, under the couch cushions, even locked in the trunk of my car, it always returned to the same place. Propped up on my desk, angled just so, waiting for me when I came home. Always waiting. By then, sleep had become impossible. Every night, I sat in front of it, fighting the gnawing dread in my stomach, telling myself I wouldn't look this time. And every night, inevitably, I did. I had to, because the photo wasn't just showing me strange shifts anymore. It was showing me the future. And I couldn't shake the fear that if I ignored it, if I failed to watch, something far worse would happen. The night after my neighbor's death, the image sharpened again. The boy now stood at the edge of the yard, closer to the invisible boundary between his world and mine. His eyes glowed faintly, catching the light like an animal's. The father had disappeared entirely. The mother was only a ghost of her former self, a pale blur fading into the background. And the shadow figure. It was no longer confined to the house. It stood in the yard beside the boy, tall and skeletal, its pale face angled directly toward me. In its long, thin hands, it clutched the doll. But the doll wasn't the same anymore. Its glass eyes had been replaced. With mine, I staggered back, my chest tight, struggling to breathe. My own eyes, staring back at me from the doll's face. That was when I realized the truth. The photograph wasn't just predicting. It was collecting. Piece by piece, it was pulling me in. That night, I dreamed of the house again. Only this time, I wasn't standing outside. I was on the porch, my hand pressed against the doorframe, my body leaning in, ready to step through. And behind the window, waiting, the shadow figure stood, its hollow gaze fixed on me. When I woke, the photograph was on my chest, lying flat against my heart. I hurled it across the room, my scream echoing in the stillness, my body trembling uncontrollably. But when I scrambled out of bed to check, it wasn't on the floor. It was back on the desk, propped upright. And in it, I was no longer at the edge of the yard. I was on the porch. The photo had caught up to my dream. The following days blurred together. Work emails went unanswered. Calls from friends lit up my phone, ignored. Food sat untouched in the fridge. None of it mattered anymore. Only the photograph mattered. I became obsessed, documenting it, snapping dozens of pictures each night, hoping that by comparing them, by studying the changes, I could understand the rules. But there were no rules. The changes weren't random, but they weren't consistent either. Sometimes the background shifted. New cracks appeared in the siding of the house, or weeds grew taller. Sometimes the figures changed, vanishing, moving, reappearing elsewhere. And always the shadow grew closer. One night, it wasn't in the photograph at all. That should have been a relief. But it wasn't, because when I turned around, I saw something in the corner of my room. A pale shape, almost too faint to see, watching me. I spun back to the desk, heart hammering. The shadow was back in the photo, closer than before, like it had tested the waters, like it was learning. By then, the whispering had grown louder too. Not just the boy's lips moving anymore. The mother, faint and ghost-like, seemed to mouth something as well. Even the shadow's thin mouth twitched as if forming words. At times, I thought I could almost make them out, fragments of sentences, a hiss of syllables. My name, maybe, a date, a place. Other times, it was only static, the white noise of nightmares. I bought noise-canceling headphones, tried drowning it out with music, but the whispers cut through everything. They lived in my head now, threading themselves into my thoughts until I couldn't tell which were mine and which belonged to them. The photograph became my entire life. I stopped going to work altogether, stopped answering my phone. My blinds stayed closed. My apartment sunk in perpetual twilight. The only light came from the lamp on my desk, shining on that cursed picture. One night, as I sat staring at it, I noticed something new. My reflection, not in the glass covering the photo, but inside it, standing just behind the boy, pale and gray, my outline faint but unmistakable. Me, watching myself. I stumbled back, my chair clattering to the floor. I pressed my hands to my face, willing it away, but when I looked again, I was still there. Closer now. Each night that followed, my reflection grew clearer, more solid. The boy moved aside as though making room for me. The shadow figure lingered at my side, its long hand resting gently on my shoulder. And I knew then, it was only a matter of time. The photograph was swallowing me whole. And when it did, I wouldn't be coming back. By then, the whispers had become voices. I could hear them clearly now, layered, overlapping, rising and falling like 100 conversations at once. The boy's voice was sharp and urgent, the mother's cracked and trembling, the father's low and hollow, the shadows a rasp that scraped across my skull. They didn't speak in sentences. They spoke in instructions. Come closer. Don't look away. Stay. Each command burrowed deep into me, twisting into my thoughts until I couldn't tell where they ended and I began. I stopped fighting them. I told myself I was only giving in temporarily, just to see what would happen, but the truth was simpler, darker. I didn't want to fight anymore. Every attempt I'd made to escape the photograph had failed. Every effort to destroy it had ended the same way. I tried burning it. The flames sputtered out the instant they touched the paper. I tried tearing it. The edges resisted, tougher than steel. I'd even hurled it into the river, certain the current would drag it away forever. When I came home, dripping and shivering, it was waiting for me on the desk. So I stopped trying. I started listening. And the more I listened, the clearer the photograph became. The image was sharper than any picture should be, the details impossibly crisp. I could see individual blades of grass in the yard, the faint cracks in the porch wood, the shine of the boy's hair. Even the shadow figure's skin, thin, stretched too tightly over its bones, gleamed with a faint sheen, like sweat. And I could see myself, no longer just a blur in the background. I was solid now, standing beside the boy, my face turned toward the camera. Only it wasn't quite my face. The eyes were wrong, too large, too dark. And the smile, God, that smile, was stretched unnaturally wide, splitting my reflection into something that wasn't me anymore. The voices grew louder every night. The boy told me secrets, names, dates, places I hadn't been yet. When I checked them later, every detail was true. An accident downtown, a fire in a restaurant, a stranger collapsing in the street. All of it foretold in whispers, all of it happening just as he said. The mother begged. Her voice cracked with desperation, pleading with me to turn away, to run, to free her. But her image grew fainter each day, her outline dissolving into smoke, until I could barely see her anymore. The father said almost nothing. Only groans, sighs, fragments of words that made no sense. And the shadow only repeated the same thing, over and over. Soon, that word followed me everywhere. In the grocery store, a child whispered it as I passed. At the gas station, the pump beeped in a rhythm that matched the syllable. On the television, a news anchor stumbled on her lines, her mouth forming the word though the sound didn't match. Soon, it haunted me. One night, I woke to find the photograph on my chest again, heavier than ever. My body felt pinned, paralyzed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The shadows in the room swirled and shifted, and I realized they weren't shadows at all. They were figures, dozens of them, pale and silent, standing at the edges of my room, watching. When I finally gasped awake, drenched in sweat, the photograph was back on the desk. And inside it, my reflection had changed again. My hands now rested on the boy's shoulders, holding him in place. My mouth was open in a scream, or maybe a laugh. I don't know which. The next day, I saw my own face in places it shouldn't be. Reflected in windows as I passed. Glimpsed in car mirrors, even when no glass was angled toward me. in the ripples of puddles on the street. Always the same twisted version. Always smiling too wide. I stopped going outside altogether. Food ran low. My apartment smelled of stale air and rot. My phone battery died, then my laptop, but it didn't matter. None of it mattered. All that mattered was the photograph and the house. Because by then, I'd started dreaming of it constantly. Not just fleeting visions, but full, immersive dreams where I wandered its halls, touched its walls, heard the groan of its floorboards beneath my feet. Sometimes the house was empty. Sometimes the family was there, frozen mid-scream. Sometimes the shadow stood at the top of the stairs, its hand outstretched, beckoning. And sometimes I wasn't dreaming at all. Sometimes when I blinked, I was there. Just for an instant. The smell of damp wood in my nose. The chill of the air on my skin. The weight of the boy's hand in mine. And then I'd be back in my apartment, sitting in front of the photograph. The line between the two worlds was gone. There was only the house now. And soon, I knew I wouldn't leave it again. That night, when I looked once more, the boy was gone. The shadow stood alone in the yard, its hollow eyes burning into me. And behind it, framed perfectly in the doorway of the house, was me, waiting. I don't remember the last day clearly. Maybe because it wasn't really a day at all. Maybe because the sun never rose. Maybe because time had stopped working the way it used to. All I know is that when I opened my eyes, the photograph was already in my hands. Not on the desk, not on the floor, not even on my chest. In my hands. And it was warm. The paper pulsed faintly, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. My heartbeat. Inside the frame, the yard was empty. The family was gone, erased completely now. The boy, the mother, the father, all dissolved into nothing, like they'd never been there at all. Only two figures remained, the shadow and me. My reflection stood in the doorway of the house, clear as glass, every detail perfect. The twisted smile, the hollow eyes, the hands outstretched in welcome, and the shadow at my side, taller than me, its hand resting gently on my shoulder. It wasn't beckoning anymore. It didn't have to, because I was already moving. I don't remember standing. I don't remember putting on shoes, or unlocking the door, or stepping outside. But suddenly I was on the street, the photograph clutched tightly against my chest. The night air was damp and heavy, each breath sharp with cold. The road stretched before me, endless and empty. No cars, no people, just silence, broken only by the sound of my own footsteps. And ahead, in the distance, stood the house. The same house from the photograph. Its roof peaked against the dark sky, its windows glimmering faintly with pale light. The porch light flickered, weak and sputtering, like it had been burning for decades without rest. I told myself to turn back. I screamed it inside my head, but my body didn't listen. Step by step, I drew closer. And with each step, the voices grew louder. The boy's sharp laugh, the mother's distant sobs, the father's groans, the shadow's rasp, all blending into a chorus, rising, growing, shaking the air around me. Come home, come home, come home. By the time I reached the porch, my body was trembling. The wood groaned beneath my weight, the boards soft with age. I reached for the door handle, my fingers shaking, and felt the cold metal bite into my skin. The door opened easily, too easily. Inside, the air was damp, thick with mildew and rot. The wallpaper peeled in curling strips, the floor warped and uneven. Dust swirled in the glow of the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. And yet, it felt familiar, like I'd been here before, like I'd always belonged here. The photograph burned against my chest. I lifted it slowly, my hands trembling, and looked inside. The image matched perfectly. The hallway, the peeling wallpaper, the bulb, and at the far end of the hall, my reflection waited. It smiled at me, wide and terrible, and raised its hand in a mirror of my own. Only my reflection moved first. I dropped the photograph, my heart hammering, and staggered back. The paper fluttered to the floor, face up. And when I looked down, the image had changed again. No Hodwa, just me, lying on the floor, my eyes open, lifeless. I gasped, stumbling backward, but the hallway around me shifted. The walls closed in tighter, the light flickered, The floorboards groaned beneath invisible weight. The voices grew deafening, overlapping, overwhelming, until I could no longer distinguish one from the other. And then, silence. Absolute silence. The photograph lay at my feet, the frame empty. No figures. No house. No sado. Only blank white paper. I bent down slowly, my hand shaking, and picked it up. The surface was cold now, colder than ice, burning my skin. I stared at the empty image, waiting for something to happen. And then, faintly, slowly, lines began to form. Shapes. Shadows. A face. My face. But not in the photograph. In the glass. The paper had turned into a mirror, and my reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed, terrified. And behind me, rising tall and hollow, stood the shadow. Its long fingers wrapped around my shoulders. Its head bent low beside mine. Its mouth moved. And this time, I understood the word. Not soon. Not anymore. Now. The glass shattered in my hands. Darkness swallowed everything. When I woke, or thought I woke, I was standing in the yard. The grass damp beneath my bare feet. The air sharp with cold. Before me loomed the house, silent and waiting. I turned slowly, my body stiff, and saw the family standing behind me. The mother's tear-streaked face. The father's blank stare. The boy's burning eyes. And at their side, holding a doll with glassy eyes, stood a girl. The missing daughter. All of them silent. All of them watching. And when I looked down, I saw the photograph in my hand again. But it wasn't changing anymore. It was finished. The image was clear, sharp, final. A family. Mother. Father. Son. Daughter. And me. All of us together, standing in the yard, our faces frozen in that same flat, lifeless stare, waiting for the next person to find us.